Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm here with my friend and co-host Melanie Bennett. Uh, we are. This is a big week. You're going to be viewing this on the Victoria Day long weekend. We're pre-recording this before the weekend hits us, so that we can spend some time with our family and enjoy the sunshine that we're expecting here in Ontario. This might be the craziest week we've ever seen. Like, the polarities of this week are mind blowing, and we've got a big event coming up on the 25th of May. So if you're watching this on the Victoria Day long weekend, this coming Saturday, May the 25th, we have a summit event, our second Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada summit. We have some fantastic speakers. And there's a big announcement related to Mia Hughes, also known as Maria Hughes, or at Crimea River on Twitter. Maria is co-founding GenSpect Canada. GenSpect is an international organization, therapists, doctors, parent activists, people contributing to the pushback against gender ideology. Maria is going to be one of our speakers. She's the author of the WPATH files that came out in early March. That was the expose that leaked documents and audio and video from the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. She's going to be talking a little bit about that, what we found and what we learned from that. Some of us knew before, but this was an evidenced long report that she created showing that the doctors and people associated with WPATH, that creates the standards of care for trans medical care, particularly for children, is an activist organization, a self-declared authority in transgender healthcare, that they knew and were complicit in knowing and moving therapy forward, that children couldn't consent to. Very disturbing. So that's been brought out into the open. And Maria's going to talk about that with us. We have Pascal Bourgeois. Pascal is at OISE. He's doing graduate work at the Ontario.
I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
That is not true. Pascal is a she, and she is
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's an E missing on here. Pascal is a lady.
Well, I was confusing Stephen Riche.
You are confusing it with Stephen Riche, but she is at UQAM, Université du Québec à Montréal, and she is teaching pedagogy essentially to. I'm not sure if it's undergraduate or postgraduate. I should probably know that. But she is an educator who teaches future teachers, and she has taken it upon herself to bring education around critical theory from, I suppose, a critical lens. She explains the Marxist roots of critical theory to some of her students, and bless her, I think sometimes she struggles with that a little bit with the university and with her students, but she makes quite an effort. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about education in Canada, and especially teacher education. And Stephen Riche, who is potentially, who you were thinking about, is a postgraduate student at OISE. I believe he's doing his PhD now. I think he's registered as for a doctorate now. He released a thesis not long ago, this spring, very early in the spring, outlining how education in Canada has essentially has become radicalized through Marxist praxis for quite some time. He has a really, really interesting thesis worth reading, which at some point I would really like to go through. I haven't done yet for reasons, but I would really like to go through. We had a chance to meet him and talk to him about his work. And
so he's going to come
talk. Yeah, and he's going to come give a chat on a similar vein, but really, how do we resist this in education? He's a really fun guy.
He's fascinating. A lawyer who recognized that artificial intelligence is going to come and take over his particular branch of law, but he brings that rhetorical, kind of capacity to argue and debate that's many lawyers are very strong for, and he has this great expression. How do you operationalize that? So expect that in the summit coming up. Gwen O'Mahony, I don't know Gwen. She's the only person on the list that I don't know.
I don't know a lot about Gwen either. Gwen O'Mahony is out in BC. She used to be part of the NDP. She defected to the
Aha.
BC Conservative Party, and so she's going to be talking about the politics that I'm not sure the full content of her talk. I think she's going to talk about her reasons for leaving and defending female sex-based rights. So a little bit more on the political side of it. And
Yeah.
then we have Chanel, which should be really great because Chanel has been sort of MIA a bit recently. So she's going to be coming back and talking with us about some of the stuff she understands best, which is the mounting bits of evidence of this Marxism stuff that Pascal and Stephen are going to mention, how, evidence of that in the classroom. So we say it's not in the classroom. It's not real. It's not happening. Chanel has ample evidence that is absolutely happening. And so she's going to give us a talk about that.
Yeah. And Nadine Ness, I had the pleasure of meeting Nadine here in Ottawa a few weeks ago at the Canada Strong and Free Network conference. And we really hit it off. We had some big conversations. She's organizing in Saskatchewan, and a former RCMP police officer. She's trained in understanding predatory sexual behavior, and they have. She's organizing about 100 candidates for this year's school board elections in Saskatchewan. So she's going to talk about organizing at a grassroots level. We're starting to talk here in Ontario right now about 2026 and fielding candidates in both the public and the Catholic boards. We're talking with networks all over Ontario, and encouraging people to think about running and what our strategy is going to be. So Nadine's going to bring some really current stuff about that. And then just like last time, a Grassroots Warrior panel, we're going to have a number of different people from across the country talking about their efforts. We've got some friends of the PRCOC there, as well as fresh faces. And just while I'm on this page, back in January on the 27th, we ran our first summit. We had lawyer Bruce Party from Queens who gave a disturbing talk about the lack of parental rights in law in Canada, as well as we had David Millard Haskell. He gave us the keynote for the event, and an excellent discussion throughout the day. You can check out those videos. We have a playlist on our channel of our various presenters and speakers. As you can see here, we had David Toder, who once again delegated this week in the WRDSB, along with one of our Grassroots Warriors from the last panel.
This was Chris
Byros Fernandez. They have really got their delegations down to a science. We don't have any clips from that, but you can check out those on the archives of the WRDSB. The board has voted to limit delegations, approve only a pre-submitted language to be able to delegate. So if they can just censor people now before they even get up to the podium, and it's clear that the Waterloo Regional District School Board doesn't want to hear from parents. They're still more generous than Ottawa. Ottawa went down to 4 minutes, and you're only allowed to present once a year, and it's at the discretion of the chair. And when Chanel Fall and I delegated in late March, we were each allotted 2 minutes, even though we had applied a month and a half before to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. Now, I mentioned this polarization that we have. We are in the middle of the Rainbow Week of Action here in Canada. Tomorrow is Ida Hubbard, the 17th International Day of something against transphobia and biphobia and all the...
Did you make up that acronym?
Idiot Hobbit?
Did you make that up?
No, it's Ida Hubbard.
Is that what it spells out?
International Day.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not. Yeah, if you're really curious about it, you can Google it. But and as part of this, I'm going to share a clip here in a second. Melanie's got a clip or two to share, and I have some as well. The EGALE, which is formerly, well, it stands for Equality for Gays and Lesbians Everywhere, is a very important organization in the gay rights movement during the AIDS crisis, and like getting rid of homophobia in our society, institutional discrimination that we had in the public service in the 80s, and you couldn't be out and gay in the military, and all this stuff. And I feel like there was a golden age for gays and lesbians of just like we're brothers and sisters and friends and family, and who cares who you love, and we have, unfortunately, because of organizations like EGALE, that became captured. I mean, they ran out of things to fight for with gay liberation because everything, we just sorted it out. But then they grabbed onto the trans ideology about 10 years ago. And they were like the organization Stonewall in the UK. They were just about bankrupt. We heard about this from Scott Nugent last September when Melanie and I were speaking we were in Windsor after the September 20th marches. And organizations like this in the States as well, they'd run out of cause, and they basically invented transphobia as their cause célèbre and their reason to fundraise. And EGALE is the most heavily funded activist organization of its kind in Canada. They held a seminar this week that partly, like, it made me feel good in some ways, because they talked about us. Now, this is a bit of a long clip, but there's some interesting things that maybe we can pause it as we go, Melanie. Feel free to,
Sure.
I want to make sure I'm going to go.
I just want to mention before you play that, speaking of EGAL, if anyone is interested, we didn't plan to bring this in, so I'm just doing this ad hoc, but Eva Korlova wrote a really fantastic article a few months ago about the funding of EGAL.
Does this current
Oh,
sorry.
Anyway, yeah. So Eva Korlova wrote an article on I think it was on her blog or on gender dissent. I can't remember which one, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. But following the money, the several $1 million money going to EGAL. If anyone's curious, I just wanted to
they're in the tens of millions. They have funding from 6 different government departments, federal government. This presentation was sponsored by Justice Canada, and they get money from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, or the province of Ontario, as well as a bunch of corporations. TikTok, you got to wonder why they have an interest in pushing trans. This is a piece. I think it's about 8 minutes long, but it's the real meaty stuff from the presentation. So here we go. We're going to hear from AJ Adams. AJ's got an interesting degree. He basically has a degree in gender activism. Here we go.
Wave that we're in actually look like? What are some of those key pillars or key moments in the past 2-ish years?
Just to stop here, he's talking about the exponential rise of hate.
So we first saw early signs of a new wave in 2022. So we saw anti-queer and trans messages and attacks appearing increasingly among movements shaped by right-wing populism. So these are things like the Freedom Convoy mobilizations. We saw school boards organizing, so anti-trans and anti-gender ideology, school board trustee candidates running. We saw anti-SOGI 123 campaigns going on. And we saw a lot of this early use of the so-called groomer framework being used. Moving into the first half of 2023, we saw some piloting. So it's taking what we saw in 2022 and expanding it at a local and provincial level. So some of those were also supported by nationwide campaign networks. But again, we saw an expanded attack within the school board system. That's when we started seeing a lot of the protests and attacks on drag events, such as drag story time, banning of library books, a lot of these flag and rainbow crosswalk policies being changed. And we saw a lot of direct attacks on frontline trans and 2SLGBTI activists, as well as organizations as well.
I'm sorry about the typing sound there. I don't know how I got that into the clips, but
From May to June of 2023, that's where our communities come alive. It's Ida Hobbit, it's Pride Month, it's the beginning of Pride season, as we call it here in Canada. And that's when we saw various actors now promoting national frameworks for action.
Oh, Ida Hobbit.
So this
I
is where we
see.
saw some of the first school walkouts. We saw some on May 17th in London, Ontario, and Calgary, Alberta. We saw a national Pride Flag walkout day. We saw a Parents' Day of Action in June. And we saw various campaigns to fly or not fly the rainbow flag. And unfortunately, right across this country, we saw many, many attacks at Pride events right across the country.
okay. Attacks at Pride events.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. What is
He doesn't actually mean
attacks?
attacks.
No. What he's saying is that there are people who are saying that they have a problem with what's going on, and what they're doing is they're deliberately not listening to what people are saying and then
Yeah.
framing that as an attack. It's an ideological attack.
Yeah.
Whether it was large cities or small rural communities, we saw anti-2S LGBTI protesters show up and try to scare away the pride.
I want to unpick a little bit. I'm going to borrow your word. No, he used a word a second ago on the screen. It says piloting. Now, this is a belief system that they have. That they think that we are much bigger than we actually are.
Do they though?
I think so.
I think that's what they're saying.
I think what he's okay. Maybe they know that this is just grassroots. This is organic. We saw people. Last year, 2023 is when I started the Gender Wars Report. I was monitoring stuff across the country, and there'd be those little pockets or little bubbles of incidents where we could, there was a sign in Kelowna, BC about gender in education, or there are only two sexes or something that got taken down, and then there was an incident here and an incident there, and he's assigning agency here. Where this is organic, it's coming up from the grassroots. There's no one piloting anything. It is the response across the country organically to the incursions of trans ideology into so many areas of our lives.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I actually think that's what they're saying to the public, because if you go and listen to multiple meetings and talks that Faye Johnstone speaks at on the topic of the Million Marches and the rising tide of hate, as it were, Faye both says, on the one hand, what you just described, a ragtag group of all these little, isolated people popping up all over the place, and then will say at other times that it is a well-funded, well-organized behemoth of a machine coming at you. Mm-hmm. Yet in the Union Leak video, in case viewers aren't aware, the union execs from all over the country got together in quite large numbers. I can't remember the exact number, but it was like 100 or something like that. Maybe not that much, but a lot. Right before the Million Marches, to denounce parents, to call them bigots, to organize against them, to cause a fright. It was a pretty spectacular leak. But in that video, they describe how they don't understand how all these people are communicating. How are these small groups all over the place becoming so organized? And so I do think that they have enough understanding of the situation to know that it is organic. I think it is a threat that it is so organic and so many people are speaking their opinion on the matter when they've been left to their own devices behind the scenes for so long. Anyway, that's just my opinion based on listening to these guys for the last year. I think they're very well aware of what they're facing.
And that only got worse in June and August of 2023, when we saw the provinces of New Brunswick and Saskatchewan release policy positions within the school systems under this so-called parental rights framework. So these key policy announcements were done by conservative politicians who formed government in those two provinces respectively, targeting things like pronouns for youth and so on. And very proud to say that EGALE Canada has legal action or is involved in legal action in both of these provinces, trying to combat these policies. And the work is still yet to come on all of that. We also saw in September of 2023, the Conservative Party of Canada having a platform change. So this is one of the first times that a major party in Canada took a very radical position in kind of this modern age of human rights.
It took a radical position.
So we saw the Conservative Party of Canada adopt new positions to ban gender-affirming care for folks who are 18 and under, as well as some policies around single-sex spaces and categories. So that's that removal or banning of trans folks in sports and different spaces like that. So although this is platform policy and doesn't necessarily mean it will become law if the Conservative Party forms government at some point, but that is often where conversations of legislation start. So it is something to be cautious of. In September of last year, we saw lots of mobilization. So we saw the Canadian anti-gender tsunami, as some folks call it. So
the anti-gender tsunami. I must have missed it when I listened to this.
Yeah, this is part of the reason why I clipped this part, because it just gets better and better as we're going along here.
It feels like it's a timeline of success of people.
I know.
Just getting together and saying, we've noticed this doesn't make any sense and we're not okay with it.
Yep.
So we saw tens of thousands participate in both protests and counter-protests concerning the so-called 1 million March for Children. So I'm sure many folks on this call were involved in that march in some capacity. There were also many follow-up rallies and action days following that, including October 21st, Stop the War on Children. So there was a lot.
I'm sorry, I just want to stop this here. I just want to remind everyone how much money is behind these efforts with EGALE, how much money EGALE has. I'm going to talk a little bit about funding for Queer Momentum, which is the organization organizing the week of protest here. But I just want to remind how many millions is going behind, how much funding, federal funding, private funding is going behind some of these things. And we do this all for free. The Million Marches was, I will reiterate, entirely grassroots, people talking over small little private networks, just having conversations. Nobody was hired. We did not receive any funding. It was just individual citizens who felt the need to tell their governments that this was not okay, that what was going on in their schools and in their families. We have no funding, zero money. People are doing this in their spare time. I just wanted to remind everyone of the power imbalance in this situation.
Later on in this presentation, so this presentation was called Countering Anti-2S Hate. That's how they say it. 2S Countering Hate at protests this week. And at one point in this presentation, it's an hour long, he put up a map of, okay, you should have a permit, you should work with police. Maybe this was one of the most bizarre things. Maybe you should see if your town or city will provide you with like garbage trucks to block off roads for safety. But he put up this map and he said, you may want to consider creating a designated place for hate, but don't call it the place for hate. You might want to call it the freedom of expression zone.
Well, that just goes to show what they feel about free expression.
Unreal. Unreal.
There was lots of things happening last fall that were both supporting 2S LGBTI communities, but also against 2S LGBTI communities. And the last piece on this timeline is in January of this year, when Alberta Premier Danielle Smith released a video outlining the United Conservative Party's plan for sweeping attacks against queer and trans people in Alberta. And although
the language, right? Sweeping attacks, right? And talking about attacks at these, they have distorted the meaning of these words. It just means boundaries.
So this was just an
People
announcement
now.
of saying this is coming. If implemented, it would impact all queer and trans folks. Although there's many school-related pieces, such as, again, pronoun policies mimicking some of the pieces that we've seen in Brunswick and Saskatchewan, there's additional pieces around gender-affirming care access and sport as well. So who's actually behind all this?
Who's behind it?
I can't wait.
So we're hoping to publish, EGALE's hoping to publish a more in-depth report in the coming weeks on this slide and the accompanying slides.
It's the Americans again.
But at a very high level, mobilization in Canada is strongly shaped by developments, not only in the US, which is where most of folks their brains go to, but also in the United Kingdom as well. And a lot of this influence comes from what's called right-wing populism, as well as the broader ultra-conservative ecosystem. And we're seeing a lot of this kind of starting around the 2016 era and having some form of effect on Canadian politics and movement. And if you're wondering, what do I mean by right-wing populism? That's Donald Trump politics. Donald Trump became president of the United States, and folks who shared his viewpoints felt if the president of the so-called free world can have these views, I can share my views as well. So we started seeing that snowball. And
so last summer, when the Muslims were saying they didn't agree with gender ideology policy and some of this sexual content in books in schools, Justin Trudeau was trying to tell those Muslim families that they were being misguided. They were being misled by misinformation from the MAGA American right-wing extremists who were confusing them. And here we're having the same line. Now,
unbelievably patronizing to say, you can't think for yourself. You know, your experience here isn't valid. You're taking cues from Donald Trump, who, I mean, the first thing that Donald Trump did in 2016 was the Muslim ban.
Yeah.
Early 2022, that's when it really started taking impact here north of the border in Canada, where we saw a dramatic rise of anti-gender frames within our political system. Excuse me. And as I mentioned, the Conservative Party of Canada is one of those pieces that we saw for the first time, with political parties being one of the key vehicles for these policy and social changes that we're seeing, both good and bad. But with the official opposition party taking this policy decision, it's something that we haven't seen and could spread to other parties as well.
I've said this before, and I'm in a bit of a deep dive with EGALE right now. I'm thinking about a piece I'm going to try and get published, shop it around and talk to a few people about framing it. But EGALE is getting tens of millions from the federal government, from the Liberal government. And they're using those millions, part of those millions, to attack the official opposition, to call them extremists, to then use lawfare to go after conservative politicians at a provincial level. It blows my mind.
Conservative is not illegal.
It blows my mind that this is, I mean, to me, this EGALE is an extension of the Liberal Party, of liberal campaigning disguised as a nonprofit and being fed millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to drive a narrative in Canada that supports the Liberals.
Yeah. They do the dirty work that the Liberals can't do for themselves.
It's frightening. Back in 2021, when Chanel and Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, and I got mobbed here in Ottawa, that was late October. I couldn't figure out where all this was coming from, and I'm speechless.
Well, it's not coming from a grassroots, poor volunteer base. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, okay. So after that incident in 2021, I took on an artificial intelligence research project, and we raised some money. And I've still been using that tool. Actually, I did a big metadata analysis exercise a couple of weeks ago. It's going to take me a while to process all of this, and it has to do. What I was running was kind of a 10-year time frame on social media about the use of language. So transphobia, AMAB, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, transgender, trans woman, trans man, all the buzzwords that go along with this. And 10 years ago, that language online just didn't exist. And you can see in the spikes of language that it went from nothing until about 4 or 5 years ago, and then suddenly skyrocketed in its usage online. And some of that language that's rapidly coming into the lexicon right now, we've been talking about, is the cis heteronormativity and the all these new buzzwords that are coming out. And we can track those at, a drag queen story hour. Well, drag queen story hour didn't exist 5 years ago for children. No one was doing that. And the way
they
that
hadn't written the papers yet.
Right? The way that EGALE is framing this is that they're the victims. It's like all of a sudden drag queen story hour is getting attacked. Well, use your freaking head. You started something and you started pushing an agenda on children, and people are saying no. This is the pattern of lots of people talk about this, the distributed narcissism, or the narcissism at scale. The behavior of a borderline or a cluster B personality is to reverse the victim and offender roles. So they are the abusers, they're the bullies, they use intimidation, they use manipulation and lies and twist language. And then anyone who objects to them gets attacked and gets accused of being the bully. So it gets flipped around. So this entire institution is built on this. I'm sure you've heard of this, Melanie. DARVO. It stands for deny, attack, and reverse the order of victim and offender.
That's why people need to. I've noticed more and more people are shedding their fear of being called things like racist, bigot, transphobe, whatever.
Yeah,
they're just words. And at the end of the day, having that tough skin is what's going to get us through this.
Yeah.
You can't.
But for them, if someone
you cannot negotiate with people who are of that disposition.
No, you can't.
And some of the key players in Canada, they can be broken down in different ways, but we have more or less 4 kind of key buckets. So we have, firstly, a conservative right-wing populist in a media bloc. So these are the folks who have the initial viewpoints against our communities, as well as those who spread them. So the right-wing media, individuals and channels. We have the trans exclusionary feminists and the women's protection actors. So these are the folks who claim that trans women are damaging women's rights, so-called. And we have the far right actors and the religious right as well.
Not the people
so
I know.
You're probably thinking, how are they actually spreading this message? People can't surely be agreeing with all this transphobic and homophobic rhetoric. Well, the anti-2SWA players lean on neutral and common sense concepts like freedom of speech, democracy, and protection of children. I'm sure many people are nodding right now and because they recognize these phrases.
Like parents' rights.
Well, okay, we should really stop pausing, but they're framing free speech and the process of democracy and protecting children as a dog whistle for anti-LGBT hate. This is very, 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 very important. I talk a lot about ideological corruption in my other work. So this is actually really, really important that they're doing this. It's not by accident.
The anti-2SWA players, they don't necessarily count on the majority to believe what they say, but rather they want the majority to defend the right to say it.
And in a free
so
world,
this works in their favor because they're able to use people who don't really know much about queer and trans issues, but they're
in a free world, that is exactly what we should do. We should defend the right for other people to say speech or say things that we disagree with, that we might not like. That's important.
It's been hard.
That's why we don't counter protest.
Yeah.
The million marches were counter protests, but if you notice this week, we've put out calls not to counter protest. Nobody's counter protesting any of these things because we don't believe in shutting down other people's right to say what they have to say. We can disagree. That's the thing. We want to disagree. We want to be able to talk about it openly. What these people don't want to do, they don't want to talk about it openly, because when we talk about it openly, they have this rising tide of hate that they call, which is simply people speaking their minds, which is in disagreement with their worldview, which is a very, very tightly bound echo chamber of ideas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad we caught that bit. I'm glad you caught that clipped bit at the end.
I want to segue because while this is happening in Canada, I'm going to make a prediction. Melanie, you've made some predictions, uh, and I want to talk about your queer prediction for the summer. But I'm going to make a prediction that this week is peak trans in Canada. It will never be this glorious for the trans activists again. They pulled out all the stops. It's peak histrionics, and all of this language about victimization. We have memes. So they've set up a website. Queer Momentum has set up a website where you can go and you can basically put in your name, and it generates a meme for you for Twitter, and you can pick one of the stock sets of language. It fits your picture into a meme, and then there's a tweet that goes out, and we're seeing it from politicians and union activists and teachers unions and school board trustees, MLAs, MPPs. And one of the things that came out of the AI, the large language model studies that we were doing, and we ran into some brick walls. We were trying to build a population sample statistically online, Twitter, Reddit. There was some, I forget the other platforms at the moment, but the chief technology officer at the AI firm he called it dead ending. And normally when they build sample networks, they use lateral social connections, digital connections online to thread out and establish the model of the network with all the different people in it. And he was dead ending because in the so-called queer and trans community, the individual users weren't connected to other people in the community, but everyone was connected to the top. And what his conclusion was, this is a top-down movement, that it's driven by just a few people or a few types of people. And we identified the clusters of those people. One of them was the lawfare people. In the States, it's Aaron Reed and Alejandra Caraballo, who's a tech lawyer at Harvard. It's the medical doctors like Quack Jack Turbin, the butcher of Stanford, who advocates. He lies with his study conclusions and interpretations and advocates for transing children. And then the other one was the fan fiction and trans fiction writers.
Don't
and those
forget
three
the academics.
Yeah, probably. So that's what we identified online. I assume that those people.
So the academics, that they were not on there?
Not to the same influence, right? So the influencers are probably picking up from the academics and the queer theory, and they're coming out of universities. But these various clusters kind of manifest.
Yeah, because I see those ideas very prominently everywhere. But it's interesting that the AI didn't pick up on it.
Then we have, EGALE is one of those organizations, heavily funded government. It's a social engineering project, pushing an ideology. It's not driven from a grassroots. It's not membership driven. You see the people coming out for EGALE and Queer Momentum and Wisdom to Action, Faye Johnstone, whatever. That's money coming down from corporations and governments to put in the hands of influencers to push this cult on society. That's where it's coming from.
But don't forget also aligning yourself with the LGBTQIA cause. And you're right, they do say that really fast. Why do they say that fast? Because they all trip up. But we were having this conversation before. Anyway, so if you align yourself, if you're a small NGO or if you're building, well, it's probably, some kind of NGO or charity or something like that. if you align yourself with the LGBTQIA cause visibly, then you have more access to funding, right? So I think that actually
Promotions,
has
advancement,
an awful lot to do with it.
political
Right.
power. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you dance to the song that they're singing, it provides careerist opportunities. Not dissimilar to the Nazis. Uh, the Nazis came out of academia largely, and there was some capture of the unions by the ideology away from the communists, um, and and it was pushed down, top down onto society. So these people are attempting to engineer society. Now, I talked about polarization. This is coming from the UK. There was hints of this right before the cast review dropped, like the day before. It caught part of the news cycle, but then the cast review took over. This is the British policy directive from the current government, and the Labour Party has committed to adopting the recommendations of the cast review. So this is a bipartisan. It's the entire government of the UK is behind this.
This government has a plan to deliver a brighter future for Britain, one where families are supported and given the peace of mind that their children are safe and being equipped with the skills they need to succeed. Good relationships, sex and health education, RSHE as it's known, plays a key role in this. However, following disturbing reports from parents of pupils being taught inappropriate content and schools who wanted more clarity on when to teach certain topics, the Prime Minister and I decided to bring forward the review into RSHE. We have listened to colleagues across government and the House, we've gathered evidence from stakeholders and considered advice from an independent expert panel who generously gave their time, experience and knowledge to support the review last year. And I would like to put on record my personal thanks to each individual. We need to make sure that the content of lessons is factual, appropriate, and that children have the capacity to fully understand everything they are being taught. We need to make sure our children are prepared for the world in which they live, but not in a way that takes away the innocence of childhood. In short, we need to allow our children to be children. It's a fine line to tread, and the schools need clarity on how to approach it. Overall, this guidance is underpinned by three core values. One, parents have a right to know what their children are being taught. Two, there to teach children facts, not push the agendas of campaign groups. Three, schools should not teach about the contested issue of gender identity, including that gender is a spectrum.
I'm going to stop there.
Beautiful. She talked. What I loved about this is that she's talking about parents' rights, and she specifically mentioned the innocence of children. This woman, I'm speculating here, but she must know that of the attack on children's innocence and what age appropriate really means. This woman knows what she's doing.
Yeah, and they got input from they put a panel, a commission together. They took the content of the cast review. You know, this is what our friend AJ Adams at EGALE was talking about. The influence coming from the UK, the far right, and the the bigotry and MAGA level conservatism. This gives me hope, right? And that's why the fact that this is happening in the UK right now. And a bunch of things happened. Hillary Cass was interviewed on National Public Radio in the U.S. There's been stuff in the big newspapers. It's getting a positive traction, even from left, traditionally left, and even progressive left institutions. And this is why I say this will be the last hurrah, the peak of trans in Canada, because by this time next year, no one's going to want to have pride visuals, as Adams was calling
Well, let me
it.
tell you, the reason that I try to share queer theorist words share the queer theory in their own words as much as possible, because I can interpret it whatever and tell you, but I try to use their writings and their words, because the concepts that they're pushing,
Additionally, there's other challenges.
Sorry,
you can see the capture by politicians and union members and all these people pushing stuff. You could tell they're really captured by this ideology, but it's either they're ignorant of it, which is possible, or they're behind it. Now, some of them are going to be behind it and some of them are going to be ignorant. And it's the people who are ignorant, if you can get across to them what this ideology really is. And this woman, the reason I said she talked about childhood innocence, she talked about parental rights, age appropriateness. This is a well-informed person who understands, like, it was clear to me that she understands queer theory very, very well. And she positioned it in a very, I don't want to say populist because it didn't come across populist, but in a way to be understood in a very plain way. Like if I were to go up there and talk about it, I'd be talking about all the different, so it wouldn't be like that. But this woman understood. And so it's really, really important to understand the concepts, or at least understand what queer means.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to segue into.
I love that she talked about outside campaigners. And what she means in the UK is the organization called Stonewall, which was one of those organizations that pivoted from gay and lesbian rights into trans activism. And Hilary Cass found that organizations like that had undue influence. We can see by this speech in schools that they've had too much influence, but also at the Tavistock. And there were incidents of almost nepotism that were reported, where the head of Mermaids, who took her son off to Thailand or some South Asian island to have his penis cut off when he was 16, influencing the Tavistock to like move kids up on the waiting list and push for these transitions. So she's specifically pointing out organizations just like EGALE that captured too much influence in the UK. And we're going to see the same thing here in Canada. It's going to be accelerated here because the rest of the world is moving on and we can't ignore it. Like the CAST review has been done. The total of 7 systematic reviews that were kind of constellated around it to get to the final report. We don't have to reinvent the wheel on this in Canada. We just have to have some politicians. Maybe we have to wait until the Conservatives come into power. Or maybe some scandal has to break that exposes this corruption and this ideological bullying. Now, I've got one more clip from that EGALE presentation. It's only a minute long, and this is another thing that's shocking to me because of all the money that they're getting, government and corporations, and using that fraudulently obtained credibility, the histrionically empowered credibility.
Additionally, there's other challenges within the criminal code that can make it challenging for us to charge someone with a hate crime. So the criminal code states that no person shall be convicted of willful promotion of hatred if the accused establishes that the statements communicated were true. And where this can get tricky and difficult is if the so-called hater is referring to reports, facts, or data that is deemed credible by some, but flawed by others. One good example of this right now is the CAST review, which is a report of the UK that looks at gender-affirming care for youth within the United Kingdom. It's a bad science and methodologically flawed, but a lot of people are taking it as legitimate science. So if someone is quoting this CAST review and using it to spew their hate, they're referring to something that in their mind is true. So it's hard to prove. So the discussion then goes from is it hate to what is factual in data and research and science.
When truth is hateful, we have a problem.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
but don't forget, if I could just take it a bit to the ideology, a lot of these social constructivists and people who believe, true believers, and I suspect that this person might be a true believer, is the idea that science is just one way of knowing amongst many, and that scientific essentialism, the reliance on science to uncover truths or to describe patterns in the world, is somehow a white supremacist ideology is prominent in that crowd of people. Let me just point that out. So the attack on caste does also come from a position of, well, this is just scientific essentialism, because I guarantee you, if the caste review had been in their favor, they would be all over it.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, as you noted in a couple of private conversations that we had, are stepping away from this. The caste review, they don't want to talk about it. They've distanced themselves. And that brings me to your prediction about queer coming up in the next few months. Can you share with audiences what that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's coming up in the next few months. I've just noticed something when I read a lot of I don't know, academic literature around education and queer theory to sort of see how the ideology presents itself in the Canadian context, but specifically in the Canadian context. And one thing I've noticed over time is the increasing use of queer. Now, all of this trans stuff is under the queer umbrella, queer just being an identity without an essence, as David Halperin in I think it was 1997 book described an identity without an essence, and that is quoted by another academic, Hannah Dyer, who quotes that, and it's also talking about what an identity that is against all norms and traditions, and not what holds the child together, but what undoes the child. So queer is really about rejecting normative values or anything normal. And trans is transgender, let's be clear, is under that umbrella. So the idea of having a gender identity is a queer idea. And I started to notice more and more queer over time. And in the literature, one of the things that I started picking up on was a tension between the binary trans person, so a transsexual who wishes to embody and appear as the opposite sex, who accepts that there are two sexes, and the reason they're trans is because they want to be the other sex. Regardless of what you believe about transsexual, trans, whatever, that's just what binary trans is. There is a big tension between that and non-binary trans or queer. Now, non-binary gives itself away that it's not part of the queer umbrella, but all these other things like demigirl, queer gender, genderqueer, fish gender for all you care, the acceptance of the furry identity, queering, or putting furries on par or having to accept them as their true selves and allow people to wear their furry costumes as teachers in schools. Like that is ultimately coming from queer. And so that tension between the binary and non-binary trans is that ultimately there's another part of queer theory. So you have this postmodernist idea that that nothing is really real, and that, all of these are social constructs, which I'm sure you've heard about social constructs, but that in its own doesn't really advance an ideology that kind of has no essence, it has no meaning, it has no boundaries, no foundation. So you can't really advance that. And what helps advance that is Marxism, the oppressor dynamics. And that's why you see a lot of it's part of the intersectional umbrella in schools,
right?
Because it aligns itself with Marxist values or Marxist ideas. And so that praxis, the practical application of Marxism, is part of the queer. That's what's pushed queer forward. So the reason that this postmodern idea that wasn't going anywhere is going everywhere is because of Marxist praxis. Now, I'm just going to finish by explaining that the reason I'm mentioning the Marxism is because the non-binary trans is a problem for, the binary transsexual that accepts two sexes is a problem for non-binary queer. So you're going to see much more of queer. You're going to hear a lot more about queer and a lot less about trans, because even now you have transsexual people who are coming out, like Buck Angel or Scott Nugent, people like that, Blair White, those are some famous ones. Even Julia Malott saying, we don't agree with this. So that's a problem for queer, because queer is not about homosexuality.
It's about breaking down the norms. I thought that it was going to change for a simpler reason. I'll speculate a little bit, because
a long-winded explanation.
My notion of the simpler reason is that because of the caste report and because of the major changes, and by the way, Germany, I think I talked about this briefly last week, but the 128th Medical Conference in Germany has put forward recommendations to social transition under 18 is gone. Medicalization under 18 is gone. All the similar stuff to clinical trials.
Yeah.
But the fact that the Cass review has come out and the medical science can't be established to justify medically transing children, that they just move away from the whole transing of kids, deny that they were ever pushing that, and just start pushing queer.
Deny that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of parts to it. I'm just explaining so there are certain academics pushing these ideas. So a lot of this stuff comes from the university and it kind of goes out into the world and all kinds of things happen to it. So not everyone who's in this believes what I'm saying because they don't read the academics, but most of these ideas come from this original source. So I'm just talking about the source ideas and how they proliferate. And what you're talking about is how that's presenting in the real world, right? So I do think that that's an element of it. It's becoming harder and harder to justify medicalizing young people given the face of the evidence. So that's not going to be possible going forward. But medicalizing young people does not stop the ideology from continuing, and that is queer. The idea that a person has an authentic self that is queer is something we're going to see more of. So people need to start understanding that this is a choice that a person makes. It is, I know I'm going to get accused of calling they used to say homosexuals was a lifestyle choice, but being queer is a
lifestyle choice.
Nobody is born queer. There is no queer identity. It is a declaration of a rejection of the gender binary and the imposition of normality. That's what you're declaring. So it is a choice. And so people need to understand that. And we don't need it in schools. We don't need to teach gender. We don't need to teach all that stuff. But yeah, I think that's going to manifest itself in many ways. But the point of all this is just to say that I do think we're going to be hearing a lot more about queer and queer children. I strongly recommend that anyone who hears that should ask the question, like we said, what is a woman? Start asking, what is a queer child? What is a queer person? And you might find a lot of nonsensical answers.
Yeah. Speaking of queer and Marxism, you've got a clip from Fred Lipgloss Hahn.
Yeah, let's go to that.
Play that?
Good segue. Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna go through a few different things here. So I'm just gonna tell a little story. A little while ago, maybe late April, Faye Johnstone, I'm not going to play these clips here, but Faye Johnstone gave a talk to friends and colleagues about what we're seeing now, actually. And in that talked about how parental rights was a really strong case for the opposition and that they really had to change their messaging around parental rights because it wasn't a winner for them. And they really wanted to bring more people on board. Faye could tell that people were kind of not buying what's being sold. And so in that talk was talking about, let's kind of find a new way to get people on board. And lo and behold, now we have this Queer Momentum Week, not Queer Momentum Week, Week of Action. And that I noticed a little while ago, I made this clip about Faye talking with the 519. Again, I'm not going to play, I'll put links in the description if you want to go watch these, but Faye was talking about how the government doesn't give them any money and they're really penny pinching and they really need to push hard against transphobia and so on and so forth. But the important thing here is that was with the 519, which is an organization here in Toronto that is really heavily consulting with schools and other organizations to push queer and trans in school specifically. I did a FOI in August that showed that the gender identity policy at the YRDSB was written by the 519 and they received a lot of money for that, which I'll talk about in the PRCOC conference a little bit. But as we could tell, Wisdom for Action, which was the previous organization for Faye, did receive an awful lot of money. And in this one, we can see nearly $1 million and then $100,000 for two different projects. But these projects ending both in April 2024, so just finished, and July 2024. And so I have a suspicion that that Faye Johnstone had to put this queer momentum together because that sort of appeared. That's kind of new. Uh-huh. So I'm wondering if that is maybe popped up to get new funding and start new projects. Just to point out that very, very, very well funded. And so this is Faye with Fred Hahn. Now, Fred Hahn is the president of QP, and he is at all kinds of protests, screaming and shouting about all kinds of oppression. So he is a true believer. And when I say true believer, not only is he big into queer theory, but he is into all of the Marxist intersectional praxis. And the reason I'm bringing Fred up is because I do want to play this clip of, oh, pardon me, this is Fred. This was today. The previous video and this one is today at
Thursday.
March. Oh, is it yesterday? Oh, yeah, today's Thursday.
Today's
yes,
Thursday.
You're
watching this on Sunday, so
yeah, at a march to liberate immigrants or to give anyway. So it's kind of unrelated in a way. But anyway, so let's just listen to what Fred,
President of CUP Ontario. Let them hear your voices! It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood! My name is Fred. I am the first openly gay president of the Canadian Union of Public Employees. With 290,000 members in Ontario and 740,000 members from coast to coast to coast. And some amazing members of our union, like the people who work at the 519, like the folks who work for EGALE Canada, like at the AIDS Committee of Toronto. I'm telling you, our union and the gay community in Toronto are like this. And I am here to deliver a message on behalf of all of our members. We stand for rainbow equality. Yes! We demand that the federal government initiate everything necessary to protect trans lives, to defend queer and trans rights, and to fast-track permanent residency and citizenship for every last LGBT refugee, all refugees. I've been thinking a lot about what to say. So many important things have been said already today. But I wanted to read you a quote from Anna Hindley Roy because I think this quote reminds us of what we can and must do. Our strategy, friends, should not only be to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, to mock it with our art and our music and our literature and our stubbornness and our joy and our brilliance and our sheer relentlessness and our ability to tell our own stories that are different from the ones we were trying to be brainwashed to believe. Because look around you, friends, do you feel the power that is here today? Yes! They want us to believe that they hold the power, but we hold the power. Yes! When the labor movement and queer and trans communities and progressive movements come together, there is nothing we cannot accomplish together. But we must believe this, friends. So will you indulge me and repeat after me? I believe. I believe that. I believe that we. I believe that we. I believe that we will win. 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 I believe we will win. I believe that we will win.
but Fred is talking about being the president of CUPE and how CUPE has, I think he said 700,000 members across the country. And that they are, he said, we're like this with the 519. With what we want, the 519 wants, and with the 519 one, we want. And we saw Faye speaking with the 519. We saw Fred chummying with Faye. And we know that the 519 is a very corrupt ideological organization that is literally trying to queer schools, and they are deceptive. I've done a number of videos sort of talking a little bit about the 519 and how they manipulate the meaning of queer. They know the meaning of queer. These are true believers, but they manipulate that to make it more acceptable for the liberal ear, to make it more acceptable. And if you don't agree with it, all of these unions, so they punish their employees, right? So these heads of unions are pushing this onto their union members, who often don't know that's what their money is going to. And if they don't agree, if they say anything, they can literally get punished. It's really, really important to understand the networks of power within the unions and how queer is a really, really important part for them to support and push. So again, I'm not going to play this one, but this is at the People's Circle in Toronto. This is Fred going with Palestine. Now, what does Palestine have to do with queer oppression? What does it have to do with the unions? Well, it's very important to understand that the unions aren't just the reason that they attach themselves to a lot of causes, and the Palestine cause is a really important cause, because no one is free until we're all free. This is a very common communist saying. And so they have to be part of all the liberation movements. Now, I don't know how the Muslims are going to feel about this come Pride season. We have Pride season coming up. I think it's Pride month in June. That's only a couple weeks away. But I would doubt that they would let this go now that they feel like they have connections with Muslims. Now, in the first Queer Momentum video from Faye Johnstone, one of the points in there was pointing out that the Million Marches had such a racially diverse group of people marching. And that's a real problem for them, for their messaging, because they felt like the queer group didn't have the same ethnic diversity. And for them, intersectionality is really important. And so now they feel, this is my speculation here, is now they feel they have the racial diversity, the intersectional diversity that they want to have. And so they're not going to let that go. They're absolutely going to pounce on that and want to be seen with the Muslim Palestine marches over the summer. But don't forget, part of that is the unions. And the unions are very, very linked to Marxist and communist organizations. We started seeing the Revolutionary Communists Party showing up again and again and again at the marches. And just to point out, this is Faye Johnstone, I think about a month ago. Oh, it says April. So maybe it was about a month ago.
Yeah, the Governor General's.
The Governor General, who is supposed to have a position, a representative from the King of the UK, which is a non-partisan position. But Faye Johnstone went and talked to the Attorney General about hate in Canada. Faye is a very well-connected individual who receives an awful lot of money to push a pet project that, for some reason, the Liberal government, the Liberal Party and the NDP party, especially the NDP being the Union Party, being the Communist Party, who really want to push queer Marxism onto people in Canada. And so that's no accident. And I just wanted to share that. Okay, so this is just one of those pictures that you were talking about.
One of your favorite guys, Randy Boissonneau.
One of my favorite guys, yes. But just to point, Faye, we haven't seen the Prime Minister put out one of these, but I won't be surprised if he did, because so many political leaders have been supporting this, and it's really important for them to show solidarity for queer Marxism. Why? I don't know. Only they could answer that for you. But here is Fred Hahn on Facebook. And as you can see at the very last line, it says, "We must also always remember that no one is free until we are all free." So if anybody wants to understand Queers for Palestine, that's your answer. Because when you are a Marxist, you must participate in solidarity for all liberation movements, whether they are Palestinian liberation movements, queer liberation movements, feminist liberation movements. It doesn't matter. If it is a liberation movement, and usually if it's called liberation, there's a Marxist element behind it, they must participate. And so that is what Queers for Palestine is. And so I'll make another prediction, that this Pride season is going to be full of interesting surprises.
Yeah. I saw a poll, and I can't quote you the numbers, but it was based just on Muslims' voting intentions in the federal election. And the vast majority, like more than the Conservative Party and the Liberals combined, was NDP.
And I don't think that's an accident either.
No, and the NDP, the unions have shown this solidarity for Palestine and for Gazans, and there's a big conflict there because this is the same group that's pushing queer theory in schools that the Muslims don't like. So the old expression about politics making strange bedfellows. I think the origin of the expression "the enemy of my enemy is my friend" is actually comes from wars amongst Islamic groups. It is going to be a very interesting few months coming up. As I'm getting to the end of my bullet points here, Melanie. Did you have anything else to before we just remind people of upcoming events and things to participate in?
Yeah, that was it for me. I really would like to remind everyone that the upcoming summit that we're going to hold with the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada should be a really good event. Last time it was pretty well attended. This time we hope that it will be just as well attended. Please go to the website prcoc.ca and you can register. It should be a really great day with some really great speakers. You're going to learn some stuff.
Mm-hmm. And like we did last time, so in January that was a attended event. You had to register to attend, and then a few weeks later we started kind of dripping out some of the presentations on this YouTube channel and making them available on the PRCOC site. So expect through the month of June that we will release the various presentations. I'm going to be hosting that day, so I'll be your MC and segueing. And I want you to have your donate button ready because we've set up a Give, Send, Go to support a project, an initiative that we have around freedom of information. Most of the time, freedom of information is not very expensive to do, but we have a couple of people doing great work on FOI, or in Ontario we call them MFIPA. That's the Municipal Freedom of Information. And some of those come back and the institutions want to charge a few $100s. And the information that we're getting from these FOIAs or these MFIPAs are really, really valuable. And I plan on doing some valuable. I plan on doing some right now. Going back to October 2021, I became aware that the Ottawa School Board had sent out an email to all parents of kids of 72,000 children about our transphobic hate for our democratic freedom of expression. We are standing there holding signs, three of us, but that warranted warning 72,000 parents of 72,000 kids that we were a problem, and that led to the mobbing and the very frightening experience that we had. So I want to get some information around that here in Ottawa with the public school board. And the same thing around before the September 20th marches. I want to understand what the executive communication was that was happening within the school board, within the board of trustees, and what their directives were around those events. And I think that's going to be really valuable information pushing back against this. We have activism within our school systems that's controlled by the unions, it's controlled by these outside groups, and we need to expose that. And so we're going to make that link available for fundraising. I'm not going to say the day is going to be like one of those old telethons with Jerry Lewis, but I do want to encourage you. And if you can give, $10 a month for a year, or make a one-time contribution of $75 or $100, that's fabulous. I think our goal is to raise $2,000. We're pooling amongst ourselves to seed that fund before the event. And as we said, these organizations and institutions are getting millions and millions of dollars from governments and corporations, not just domestic corporations, but TikTok is funding the trans agenda here in Canada through EGALE. Funding lawsuits against the government to push the trans ideology. So we need help. Everyone who's working on this is doing so on a volunteer basis, putting forward their best talents and capacities. Either the few of us like you and I and Maria Hughes and others who are public, but the many, many behind the scenes doing amazing work, but not public. And at some point, we keep talking about this. There are going to be consulting firms that are going to be either we're going to be founding them or we're going to be hired by them, and we're going to try and help to unwind this in our public institutions. But until that time, we're doing this all on our own dime. June the 3rd. Last year was June the 1st. That's the beginning of Pride Month in public education. We had very successful walkouts and days of absence. So the idea of day of absence is if you're a parent, keep your kids home from school. Coordinate with some other parents to do something not in school and just do a silent protest by not having a bum in the seat on that day. The freedom of information work that people did. We had Emily Duggan did the work in BC to find out the absence rates, and the numbers were stunning.
And obviously it works because we talked about it right at the beginning of this episode, how they have noticed it absolutely works. And so if you don't want to go to a protest or organize a protest, don't. Just keep your kids home from school. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And the more people that do that, to send that silent message, the administrators know, the directors of education know, they recognize that people are not on board with this. And it's not a small thing to ask people to keep their kids home from school, unless you're lucky enough to be in Ottawa, where you're a federal public service and you don't have to go to the office like normal people. It's a sacrifice, and it's a small sacrifice that people can make. And we encourage you to do so. Then upcoming September the 20th, the what do they call it? The tsunami. Parents' Rights Tsunami. September 20th is a Friday this year, and we're encouraging people to organize local peaceful protests and marches, and we'll be coordinating over that. We started in July last year. We'll be connecting the networks together. It will be very interesting because last year, I'm going to say 50% of the protesters here in Ottawa were Muslims. We had conservative Christians as well, and we had regular parents, and we had the TERFs came out, and the Mama Bears, and all these different groups. And it was a great day on Parliament Hill. There'll be marches like that across Canada on September the 20th, and these guys at EGALE said we're winning. No, they're not. That common sense. That parents' rights, that those dog whistles of protecting children, those are real things, and it doesn't take
free speech as well.
A free speech, democracy. They use democracy as an excuse. So that it's true. A lot of stuff is coming over from the UK. Common sense and good science, as opposed to the nonsense that we've been getting from trans activism. I'm continuing with my campaign. I've been writing a letter weekly to the CEO of CHIO, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, the directors of our local school boards. I've started adding members of the boards of directors of the Children's Hospital. I'm going to be upping the ante on that game in the coming weeks. I want to do something consistently every week as me. I'm not representing any organizations. I've had people reach out to me and say, "Can we join in?" I'm glad to have people join in and to add to the voices. But sometimes it's more expedient for an individual to write a letter than try and put up something and get it vetted and edited by a group and signed off on, and that can take weeks or months. Even I've seen. So this is kind of a rapid fire thing. I believe that the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Gender Clinic, which sees 400 to 500 kids a year now, if the exponential rise continues, it will be 700, 800 kids this year in 2024 if we don't stop this, that they're going to close. The gender clinic's going to close. It's just a matter of time. And the reality is the machine may already be working behind the scenes. I reached out to the chief of staff of the hospital. I reached out to their head of nursing. And I'm just going to keep sending updated information, the changes in school policy. This week, I'm going to forward to the directors of ed and all the school board trustees for the Catholic and the public boards You can take on efforts like that yourself in your own school districts. This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
And don't be afraid of being called names.
No.
Never be afraid of being called names.
It's a badge of honor, and after a while, we had lots of fun watching that video earlier in our conversation, Melanie, about all the victories that we've had since the beginning of 2022, and we will push back this radical ideology that has made so many incursions into our lives, affected so many people, harmed so many children and families, and we're going to win this.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think it's a progress. More and more people are aware of some of these problems. I'm certainly trying to do my best. I'm trying to do my best right now to publish some articles to get some of this information to people. That is Canadian specific. That is about education in Canada related to queer theory and how it presents itself in the classroom, the critical turn in education, the queer turn in education. I hope to get some of those published soon so people can start looking at that. But if you're interested, you can also look up Stephen Reish, University of Toronto, wrote a thesis. If you're interested in reading a academic master's thesis, I highly recommend it. If not, I'm going to try to write some articles about what he's written and also some of the research that I've done over the coming months. I'm going to do my best, hopefully get some of that in there. I think there's certainly more of an appetite for that information, both in terms of the publishers, but also in terms of an audience. I think people are more ready to read these things now. So yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting summer. I cannot wait.
One thing we didn't talk about today, Melanie, was your you met. I won't go into too much detail, but last week you met James Lindsay at Conceptual James.
I had a whirlwind 2 weeks because I sat down and had a conversation with Benjamin and Leslie Boyce, which was great. And apparently I have a posh accent. He was speaking to Helen Pluckrose this morning on a different... Well, I heard it this morning. Apparently he was talking about me saying I have a posh accent. I'm very, very flattered, Mr. Boyce. Thank you very much. And and then last weekend I went to the Rebel News live event. And I obviously went because James Lindsay was speaking. He's helped me understand many things, but I've been trying to... It's all well and good listening to James Lindsay, but he didn't talk about the Canadian context. And I, as a parent affected by it, wanted to know, well, what about Canada? And then when I realized I can't find much about Canada, I can find a lot of people complaining, but I didn't find the information I was looking for. A lot of stuff in America, in the UK, nothing in Canada. So that's why I started reading it myself. I started trying to absorb it, understand it, and then eventually share it with other people. So I had an opportunity to go listen to Mr. Lindsay or Dr. Lindsay. And I didn't expect to speak to him, but no, I ended up having dinner with James Lindsay and Bruce Pardee and Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, and Lisa Bildy. Was it? Yeah, just a lot of really, really interesting people. It was a really good dinner. So
you're at the Cool Kids table.
There was a lot of clever, interesting people, and a friend that I cannot mention. I haven't forgotten you, friend. I cannot mention. I just cannot mention you. But it was a really great night. I think. It's really important. You know what? This is such a small world. This is what I'm realizing. First of all, Canada is a village, and it's even more of a village in terms of what we do, Shannon. But that's expanded. I really wanted to expand to America because one of the things that we struggle with here is getting an audience. And I think partly is that I think Canadians tend to like American content. Now, I could be wrong, but I think this might be true because since speaking to the Voices and since making friends with James Lindsay, who's been retweeting a lot of my work, there's definitely been more attention on what we're doing. So yeah, I think it's really important to make those friendships. So I don't know, here's to friendships. It was a great night. Enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed our conversation today, Melanie. As always, I hope our viewers are enjoying a fabulous long weekend. If you're taking some time out while you're cleaning the garden to listen to the podcast, or maybe you saved it for your Tuesday commute, we're really thankful that you've liked and subscribed, and that you're paying attention to what's going on in Canada. We're all doing. There's a lot of important work happening across the country, and we have the momentum at this point. So have a great week, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Have a great week.